Until he was 10 days old that Sally Phillips' eldest son, Ollie, was diagnosed with Down syndrome. But rather than tragedy, Ollie brought comedy, joy and mischief to her family's life.
Well, with a new... that she wanted to prove that having a child with Downs is not life-ruining and can actually be quite the opposite.
Knock, knock.
Who's that?
85.
85 who?
Doctor!
This is Ollie, my son. He likes chocolate ice cream. He likes Barcelona Football Club. He also has Down syndrome. When Ollie was diagnosed 11 years ago, I never could have imagined that our family was going to end up looking like this. Or like this. Or like this.
Oh, well, Sally joins us now. And obviously this is a very personal story for you. And what was it about this subject that made you want to do the documentary in the first place?
Well, I suppose partly it was the way Down syndrome was always reported in the media. It was always a Down syndrome person and not a person who happens to have Down syndrome. And they were always reported as suffering. And I looked at my son and I thought, really, he's not suffering at all. And it seemed that the popular conception of Down syndrome was of somebody with a terrible disease who would have been better not to be born. And I thought it would be the advent of this new test gave an opportunity to stand up and give some people courage and go, you know, it's really, yeah, there are extra challenges. I'm not putting a bow on it. It is harder and it is a different life. But, you know, it's harder to run a marathon than to walk to the pie shop. There's also great, great rewards and my life has been enormously enriched.
But if you were honest, you sort of hoped that somebody else was going to make it, didn't you? It wasn't necessarily something
I didn't want to do it at all. I kept saying to... you know, people who make panorama-type documentaries, you know, there's a really important documentary to be made, and I would shove figures under their noses going, look at the calculations about this new test. They are not counting. They are counting a Down syndrome life as being worth 1/7 of a life of a typical baby. They're saying this is an overall health benefit, which is actually an increase in terminations. And I was going, this says that this is a really good moment to hold a mirror up to society and say, look, you know, look what we value. Look, we're spending all the money, pretty much all the money, we're spending researching Down syndrome. We're spent not researching how to improve their medical conditions or how to integrate them better in school. We're spending it on detecting them before birth. And that this money doesn't benefit the Down syndrome community in any way. Let's have a debate. That's all I wanted to do, and I'm really happy to be here because it means the debate is
has begun. It has begun. But even from that first moment in Ollie's life, and he was 10 days old when you were told, and the manner in which you were told, the doctor came in as sort of this terrible news, this kind of.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't blame him at all because I think you know that. At the time was the story, wasn't it? That's what doctors are taught in medical school to believe, and families are shocked when they receive the news. And actually, you know, the midwife, well, she was a nurse actually, the nurse that cried, at the time I thought, what a wonderful, empathetic human being. And I did think, gosh, it must be tough to be a neonatal intensive care nurse and to see that all the time. But the truth of the matter is that the most recent up-to-date research on large numbers of families shows that 99% of people with Down syndrome are happy with their lives, 97% of families love their family member with Down syndrome, only a very small number are unhappy. And 86% of people with Down syndrome say they make friends easily. You know, siblings are the only difference between siblings of people with Down syndrome and a typical group of siblings is that they're slightly more likely to go into the caring professions. So they're slightly more likely to be useful to society. So I just want to... I'm not telling anyone what to do, and I'm not saying, you know, certainly I'm not an American-style pro-lifer, but I just want to stand up for the people who haven't yet been heard and say, you know, for them, this test is bad news.
But you also say that, in your travels, and you've travelled the world looking at this, that there are certainly a very large proportion of women who have been corralled into terminating the baby.
And for me, I find that the most tragic thing of all, really, that I think, you know, the thing about privilege is it blinds you to your own ignorance. And so if you're there is a bias against Down syndrome, and most people are not even aware that they have it. And so there is explicit pressure to terminate, which might come from someone saying, I've booked you in for a termination in the morning, or these are all direct quotes, by the way, from women in hospitals and recently. Stop this nonsense now. You know your marriage will end if you have this baby. They put a great strain on the NHS, you know. These are all direct quotes.
Wow.
And then there is the hidden, which is much more common, the hidden pressure, which is, I'd terminate if I were you. Do you really think you could cope with a child with Down syndrome? You tell me. That's actually guiding, that's actually directive, isn't it? And yeah, I mean, it just goes on.
People did ask you. I mean, it's a hell of a thing to ask someone, but people did say to you, almost with an element of sort of sympathy, well, did you know? Were you aware?
I mean, did you know is a kind of horrible thing to say, because they're bringing into the question, should your child exist when he's just on the swings next to you? But the question I really find very difficult to deal with, but I'm used to it now, is didn't you know? As in, if you had known, you would obviously have terminated. And I think what's happened is that we have, without noticing it, switched from being a society where the assumption is you won't terminate for Down syndrome, or that you keep your baby, to the assumption being that you ought to have. So I think, far from being an improvement for women, this test is actually catching women in a guilt trap, where you are guilty if you don't do the test and you don't find out, and you then have a child with Down syndrome and impose that child on the national purse, is the way some people see it. And you are guilty then if you do terminate, you have to live with that. And that's I mean, no one's saying that anyone terminates lightly. I mean, I am so grateful that I was never put in that position.
Well, the thing is also that I would hope that in areas that we are much better, much more inclusive. I mean, you look at brilliant Liam Bairstow in Corrie, a terrific actor. Oh, you see, he's an actor, and that's what I see him as, an actor in a great show.
Yes, and I think, you know, a lot of us, and me included, you know, I've been on both sides of this debate, as in I didn't know anything about Down syndrome, and now I do know something about Down syndrome, and yeah, I think there hasn't been... You know, people with Down syndrome weren't even allowed to go to school until 1970. Our next-door neighbour had a sister with Down syndrome, and the child was just taken away instantly, and the father got a letter from the obstetrician saying, I'm so sorry I'm on holiday, or you wouldn't have had to deal with any of this unpleasantness at all, meaning that he would have killed the baby during birth.
At
least
so
you say that, I mean, that Ollie is a comedy, not a tragedy. He's enriched your life and the lives of everyone around you, and the debate has started.
Yes, well done you. Well, the documentary, if you want to watch it, and you should do, A World Without Down Syndrome, it's tomorrow at 9 p.m. on BBC Two. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Right, still to come, Sharon.